and these are just a few of the things, but as one wise woman summed it up, she told me, this makes everything better. And
Wow.
You know,
guess,
I tend to agree, actually. I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I didn't know these stats were out there, but now I've got the evidence to back it up. Hey, Christy.
You are listening to the Famous at Home podcast with Dr. Josh and Christi Straub.
Because when it's all said and done, we all want to know that we were famous at home. Welcome back to this Famous at Home podcast. We're so delighted to have you. This is episode 4 of a 5-part series that we're in called Cultivating an Emotionally Healthy Marriage. Today's episode is one of my favorites that I think that we've ever done. This was an interview that we had with our friend Laura Duggar actually a couple years ago in 2022. And we put it into this series because we wanted to make sure that we had a great conversation about sex within the context of cultivating an emotionally healthy marriage. This was the best conversation I can remember back on in any podcast episode we've done on this particular topic, which is why we wanted to put it in. Laura is a Christian sex therapist. She also has her own podcast called the Savvy Sauce Podcast. We will put that in the show notes today for you to check that out. This was one of my favorite interviews we've ever done. And so I hope you enjoy it. I know you will enjoy it, but I would encourage you to listen to this episode. She does put a disclaimer in there. You can see that in the show notes at the timestamp. We are speaking to couples who are healthy in healthy situations. And so we just want to make sure that we put that as a disclaimer. And Laura talks about that as you listen today. If these are conversations you want to have with your spouse, you're not sure how to have them, just simply, these are great conversations. So just send the podcast, say, hey, would you listen to this? And let's have conversation about it. I would also be remiss to say this is the last week that you can sign up for Tender and Fierce. So if you haven't already done that and you want to get in, you have to sign up this week. This is the last time. Deadline closes August 2nd if you're not in before August 2nd. So please make sure that you do that. I also want to say, men, the interest form is there for the cool discipleship journey that we are cultivating for later this year. If you're interested in that, please sign up. Also, finally, do not forget, we have the PDF downloads for every one of these episodes in the summer series. So make sure that you see that in the show notes, download this, use it with your spouse, use it with your small group, just create conversation, questions in there to create conversation, take notes, that type of thing. So we just really want to be able to help you cultivate community around these conversations. Without further ado, I want to bring you in on our conversation with our friend, Laura Duggar. It is such a joy today to have a new friend of ours on the podcast, Laura Duggar. She is a podcaster. She's a therapist. She's a mom of 4 beautiful girls. She's a wife to an amazing man. And we're excited to have her on the podcast. So welcome, Laura.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. And I just want to say up front, I love the work that the two of you are doing. So big fans of both of you and all of your work.
Well, we're so grateful. And we're excited to introduce our audience to your work, which is super exciting. And so I'd love to start today by just having you introduce your family. Tell us a little bit about your family and kind of what God's been laying on your heart recently.
Sure. Well, we live now in central Illinois, and my husband, Mark, owns a Chick-fil-A in the area. So that's a big part of our life. We love meaningful work. And we were always surprised. We never found out in pregnancy if we were having boys or girls. And we, like you said, have 4 daughters, and they are 8. Let's see, they're all changing soon. So basically 8, 6, 4, and 2 right now.
Girl, I'm the same. It's like, it changes every year. It's so hard to keep track.
Yeah.
But 4 girls, my goodness. That we didn't find out with our oldest. We did find out with the other 2 because I was so shocked with the first one. I was convinced it was a girl. And after that, it's like I needed to know.
Oh, it's such a fun surprise whenever you find out.
It is.
You're
so true.
Yes, so that's us. And then, like you said, my training is as a marriage and family therapist, and my specialization was in Christian sex therapy, which is not a track I expected to study, but the Lord definitely planned that for my own sanctification. And I just learned so much from him in that area. And now that's led to launching this podcast called The Savvy Sauce, where we have practical chats for intentional living.
I love it. And so if you're listening and you are a regular listener to Famous at Home, we want to introduce you. We'll put it in the show notes, but the Savvy Sauce podcast and to Laura's work. And you're going to be introduced to her today as, and just kind of, just the heart behind who she is and what she's doing. And I love it because sex is not often a topic that we tend to talk about on the podcast that much. And so, you are coming on today we just want to have a real conversation, talk about it in a healthy way. And I just love to hear, just as even we get started, how did you, so it was the track that you got into in college and in your grad school, which was a surprise, but how did God call you into this field? And who are some of your favorite people in this area?
Sure. So when I was in college, I realized one day, hold on, you're telling me that you can go on and become a marriage and family therapist and you can get paid to talk to people about their relationships. That just sounded like a dream job. And I was not a Christ follower at the time, but through God's sovereignty, really, I ended up applying to this school in Atlanta, Georgia. It's called Richmond Graduate University. And the day before classes started, I became a believer. And this was a Christian school.
Come on.
The day before?
The day before. And
oh my goodness.
he just accelerated so much that first year. But I thought I was studying marriage and family therapy. And then I found out that first week of classes, you could choose one of 5 specializations. And let me see if I can remember. They were either child and adolescent, addictions, spirituality, Christian sex therapy, or one more that I'm missing. And Christian sex therapy kept jumping off the page at me. And I thought, this is so weird. I don't want to admit this to anyone. So I thought, okay, who is going to talk me out of this? And I called my dad, and read him all of the specializations.
That feels such like a safe bet. Like, Dad, there's no way he'll push me that way.
Well, I knew, of course, he'd choose spirituality, right? Because my whole family are believers. And so I thought he'd push me toward that. And I just remember he paused and said, honey, sex is such an important part of marriage. And if you really want to help marriages, I think you should choose Christian sex therapy.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
And that's how I got into it.
There you have it.
Daddy said, just the wisdom in that. That's amazing. Wow.
Okay, so I want to ask you this question. You live in this space. What are a few fun facts about sex?
Sure. Oh,
let's have fun. Yeah, let's have fun with it.
That's a great place to start. And first, I do just have to give disclaimers as we talk about this, because anytime you discuss sex, it requires a few disclaimers, because I am going to be responding as if I'm talking to couples who are in a healthy and loving and safe marital relationship.
That's good.
And that's because there is completely different advice for destructive or abusive marriages. Yeah. And I'm not sure where your listeners are coming from. I'm sure some people have a background of unaddressed trauma or specific medical health issues. So right away, I just want to suggest that individual hurts require individualized care. And for those who are not in that safe and loving marital relationship, I really wouldn't recommend this conversation as the place to begin. I would start, maybe one place to look is for a Christian sex therapist in your area.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, and we'll make sure we have resources to that in the show notes as well, because I'd love to make sure here, even at the end, we point people in the right direction. So.
Oh, that's fantastic. And then I do also want to address those who are in the loving, committed marital relationship, and sex is fun. I think I'm just most fascinated at the way it can make so many things in marriage better overall, because when we are regularly engaging in sex, we just tend to extend more grace to each other. And that may be because of some of the science and the way that God intended it, because when we're engaging regularly in sex, we are simultaneously lowering stress levels and also increasing or stirring our affections for each other. And this may be a more well-known fact that sex with our spouse also aids better sleep, but it also renews our energy. And then there's crazy bonuses I feel like the Lord just threw in, that it lowers our blood pressure and it decreases the chance of osteoporosis and heart disease.
Wow.
And these are just a few of the things, but as one wise woman summed it up, she told me, this makes everything better. And
I tend to agree, actually. I mean, I don't know. I didn't know these stats were out there, but now I've got the evidence to back it up. Hey, Christy.
This is scientifically backed.
And even talking about, I love hearing, this is so great to be on the conversation with a married couple, because even your laughter together, I just think it does promote such a playful part of marriage.
That is so true. It's like, I've noticed, at least, especially for Josh, it's like the little boy comes out. Like you can be super stressed with, life or work or whatever it is. And then it's just like this whole other side comes out, and it's like, it's just sweet to see it again for me as a wife.
Absolutely. I love that.
So let me talk about this, because I think this is important even as we get started. Because, in our culture, especially if things are not going well in the marriage, or like you're having, trouble, or there's, just communication issues or things like that. Or let's just say also too, there's times where, we come from, just use pornography, and we want to add something into the relationship, or we want to add something into the marriage to make it a little spicy. You're a little spicier, as I think of Savvy Sauce podcast, but like, how do we, like, there's times that we want to sauce up our relationship, and it's not maybe appropriate, or it's not as healthy as we think it might be to do that. Can you just kind of lay a biblical foundation for us for sex, I think, as we get started here, just to kind of set the tone for our conversation, and then we can kind of get into some of the practical details and like just kind of ways that we can even engage the conversation with our spouse?
Yes, I think, I think that is the best place to begin. So a biblical perspective on sex means that we need to begin with scripture, and God's word does talk about sex in the Old and New Testament, but I think the book that typically will come to our mind is the Song of Songs. So I'll just highlight a couple of those verses, and that really gives us a view into God's grander design and intention for sex within marriage. So in Song of Songs 5, she says, "His mouth is most sweet, and he is altogether desirable. This is my beloved, and this is my friend." So I think that's such a great place to start, because it gives us the secret to being great lovers, and that's to first be great friends and to continue to be both. I think it's a cycle that fuels each other. When you're friends, you're better lovers. When you're great lovers, you're better friends. And then we get a glimpse into the loving way that he communicates with her. He has the power to speak so much life over her body. And he starts with her toes, and he goes from her toes up to her head. And he concludes in chapter 4 with saying, "You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you." And I don't know a woman who wouldn't love to hear that. So I think he awakens so much in her just with his communication. Yeah. And then just one more section to highlight in chapter 7. I think this is what I thought of when you talked about the fun and the spice, but it's her talking again. And she says, "Come, my beloved, let us go to the countryside. Let us spend the night in the villages." And at the end of verse 12, she says, "There I will give you my love." And I'll keep unpacking another verse after this, but just right there, I think a lot of wives can probably relate to this, because you can feel more alive or adventurous when you get out of your normal surroundings. And that could be a date night where you are out of the house, or if ever possible, even better, to get an overnight with your husband. But that definitely doesn't mean that a getaway is required to be sexual. But I do think when we build in these special times with that type of getaway, couples seem to be more refreshed at home and more enthusiastic about sex. And she goes on in verse 13 and says, "At our door is every delicacy, both new and old, that I have stored up for you, my beloved." And I think that is the amazing biblical model for us, because God has so many gifts for us in this realm of sexual intimacy that are stored up for us and that we store up for each other, old and new. And he's showing us there's no greater pleasure that we can experience on earth. And even better, this pleasure, when it's in marriage, it is not sinful. It's the opposite. God actually celebrates it, and he invites us to drink and drink deeply.
Man, I love. Okay, so there's so many things to talk about as you brought that out, because I just think it's beautiful. I think I'm going to start with this one because it really piqued my interest. Is like the idea that the husband is saying there's no flaw in you, and in a world today where we're living, it's such a Instagram, it's so like I even know for Christi, like just different ways that she has, like the way, like not eating sugar, or like, there's times where she's like, looking, and I'll let you speak to this, but like the insecurities that we have, I think, as in our culture today, because of this idea of perfection, it's very easy. And I think more so for women, and I'm speaking on behalf of my wife here, even though she's sitting beside me, I think it's very easy to feel insecure. But when we as husbands like honor our spouses and honor our wives with, "Man, you're beautiful. You look beautiful today. There's not a flaw about you." Like that type of thing, that type of language, it's the power of life and death on the tongue. And you bringing that out, I think, is just really, like, that struck me as something very powerful in that.
Oh, I completely agree, because I think you're bringing out, there's kind of a responsibility or an opportunity for both of us. For women, that is very common. I believe it's over 95% of women do struggle with some form of body image, and that does show up in the bedroom. So I think the husband can be a hero here with complimenting everything specifically, and not just her breasts, but complimenting in Song of Solomon. He does include that, but he compliments her toes and the features of her face and her voice, and that helps women. Like you said, it speaks life over her. But then for the female, for the wife, if she can truly trust her husband, there are numerous studies that they do see her differently. She sees herself one way. Even in Song of Solomon, she has body image issues come up that she's embarrassed about. And he doesn't see that. He sees her in a very different light. And there's even, if we can go into the science of it, I believe it's vasopressin. So if you can track with me, this is one of the ways that the Lord intended for marriage, for the husband to truly view his wife as the most beautiful woman on earth. She is the standard of beauty. And so I want her to trust this is how he feels about her, because when you come together sexually, when he reaches orgasm, there is vasopressin that's released, this chemical bath, and it's dubbed the monogamy hormone because it, at the same time, makes him find this woman that he's being intimate with, his wife, to be more attractive, and every other woman is less attractive. And they even hooked up studies to men's brains where he was then shown these pictures of beautiful women, and they tracked his brain activity. And then they showed the picture of the woman he had been intimate with, and his brain went nuts and fired up. And so I think for women, the responsibility is to trust her husband and receive and believe those positive thoughts that he shares with her.
That is so powerful, Laura. Like, I think as women, like, and it's interesting when you have conversations with friends, you recognize like it is the specificity, like what you just said about like the complimenting and receiving the compliment, of that is true. Like, he's not saying empty words to me. It's like, that is true. And he truly sees, even when there are times we have had conversations like this, and Josh is like, I'm like, I just had a baby, or, so when you're just feeling like really at your not best, and he'll like, Christi, I just think you are, and the way he'll describe, I'm like I had to learn to receive that, because he wasn't making it up. But I think, the lie in our head is like, oh, he's just like, giving me a line of, what he thinks I want to hear. But I had to really start to trust that, like, that was true. That's actually how he sees me, even though right at this moment, that's not how I see myself.
Or to or that I'm using it to get what I want, right? It's like that. I think that is also a very common thought. It's like, well, you're just telling me that because you want sex tonight, right? And it's like, no, I'm telling you that because I genuinely believe it's true, and I want sex tonight. But it's also because I genuinely believe that it's true, and sex would be a great benefit or a bonus. But I'm telling you this because I see it in you, and I think we have had struggles with that in our own marriage at times.
Yeah. And it was my ability, like, just like as I'm teaching my daughter how to receive a compliment, it's like, I realized I have to look in the mirror, like, I have to receive the compliment and not allow a lie that I have believed, like, to let it really actually replace the lie with truth and allow my husband to speak that truth over me.
That's so good. And really just witnessing your marriage, even through your podcast, like, Christi, I'll just speak into you. I can hear Josh's adoration of you, even across the podcast. So I think you guys do model this very well.
Thank you for saying that. But it's hard fought for, like, it's not, I don't want people to, like, it's not, that's like something we've had to fight for, and to allow, because, even when you're doing like certain things, like, we'll work with a couple, it always feels clunky at first, and it feels awkward. And I think that's, especially if it's like a new marriage, or if you're walking out of, some hurt and some brokenness, if there's been some, places where this was like really tender, it's hard to like step into that new way of being and, like, okay, I'm going to receive this compliment. Or even for a man to have the courage to say those things, and like Josh said, and not have it interpreted like, oh, you just want something from me, or, and it's just, I just am extending the grace to people. It's okay if it feels clunky and weird and not, altogether natural at first, because there's so much of this, just like anything, it just requires so much grace and falling and failing, and yet trusting the heart of your spouse that they are for you and that they truly love you and want your best interest. And moving forward with, like you said, with that first and foremost in our minds, because then all of this is a bonus, right? Like, it's all the good stuff. It's like the icing on top. It's not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just, it's the good stuff on top, and allow yourself, just as you are as friends, like, you just kind of have to bumble your way through in the beginning.
Absolutely. And if it provides a little bit of laughter, that's all the better. And I think you're bringing up this good word, trust. And I would say, even with complimenting and with non-sexual touch or any touch at all, that is a really practical piece, not to just do this on the times that you're going to come together intimately, because that won't help the trust bond form as easily. But when this becomes more of a way of life, where you're sincerely thinking these things of your husband or your wife, and then you're communicating them regardless of that being attached to sexual intimacy, I think that's helpful, because we're definitely not promoting manipulation where you're saying this to get something. That is not the heart of this content. It is speaking life and loving each other well.
Speaking of that, let's go to there, because this is where, let's just say it has been, because these conversations can be awkward, but I think, as Christi and I have learned too, and what you're getting at is making it fun and enjoyable, but at the same time too, that can be difficult when you haven't talked about sex, or maybe you grew up in a home where sex wasn't talked about, and so now all of a sudden it feels really weird to you. It feels almost icky. Like, you grew up in a Christian culture that we're taught, abstinence, and then all of a sudden you're just thrown into the marriage, and it's like, okay, now have fun and be free, and you're like, I don't even know what that means or how that looks, and so to talk to my spouse about that is even more kind of strange, and I don't even know how to navigate that. So how do we have healthy conversation as it relates to, let's say that a spouse doesn't feel comfortable with something that another spouse wants to bring in, or they're like, how do we have those, like, what is a healthy way to enter into some of those conversations and to look, because, and I think I'll throw this question out there too, as you're answering this, but because I think men and women do have differences in marriage as it relates to sexual intimacy. So, what are some of those differences, and how do we come and find common ground in those differences without feeling like we're giving in somewhere where it feels like a duty, or it feels like we're doing something we don't feel comfortable with?
Those are great questions. Okay, so I'm going to take this approach first, just for communication in general, because I think you're right. If you grew up maybe even in a Christian home, some people believe that sex is dirty, but I would maybe just start with the Song of Songs. Sex in marriage is not dirty. It is pure. It is clean. It is blessed. It is honoring to the Lord. It is sacred and holy and good. And he gives us a lot more permission than we probably give ourselves. So I think that's the best place just to start for yourself to read through. But then I think this podcast is a great way, if you're a little bit shy in your relationship, sharing this podcast episode with your spouse with a text of, hey, would you be willing to listen to this? Could we talk about this? Because sometimes it's easier for people to write things down, whether that's a letter or text message. But if you're really brave and you want to say it out loud, you could lead with a question of, do you feel like we should talk about sex in our marriage? Do you feel comfortable if I would bring something up? Do you think it would help us? You could, any of these questions. But I think a natural way to do that, podcasts are awesome because that puts you on the same page, and you can even pause it in real time and just say, that articulates something that I've felt before. Or you can ask, is this really true for you? So that's a natural communicator. And then I can even send you a list of Christian resources that I highly recommend that are biblically based. And this is the best way, if you're really brave, to read these out loud together. And that's because it's going to get you used to saying these words. And also you've got the real time of pausing the book and asking each other,
that's good.
Do you relate to this? And you're going to laugh. It will be awkward. You can expect that. And it's going to be so much fun. So that's okay. Like Christi said, it might be a little clunky, but that's part of the process.
Yeah, that's good. And that's where just a practice of extending grace to each other in that process too. It's awesome.
Absolutely. And usually couples who talk about this more engage in it more, and their enjoyment goes up, and even their amount, especially for the wife, the orgasm number can go up. So there are many benefits just to talking about it. But you did say, what are some common differences? And I think that's important to note as well, because sometimes it's our differences that can have us talk about it, but it's talking about sex in a way that's conflictual. And so we're not bringing up at a neutral, positive time. Sometimes we're just bringing it up if we're dissatisfied. So I'm going to just lay out a few common differences. And then after I share these, you can just tell me if there are any you want me to go into more detail about.
Awesome.
But first, I just think the timing preferred and the style of touch is different for how long it's going to take both spouses to reach climax. And couples oftentimes will have one spouse who has more of a spontaneous desire, and the other has what we would consider to be receptive desire. So those are going to play out differently with initiation and desired frequency. And then a few more that come to mind, there's varying levels of testosterone between men and women, and that makes a huge impact on the overall sexual experience. And then husbands can have a single orgasm at one time, whereas wives can sometimes have multiple orgasms close together. Some spouses relax by having sex, where their spouse may have to relax in order to be ready for sex. And you can see where those are opposite. Let me think if there's any others.
That's good. Yeah.
Or were there any in that list that kind of stand out that you?
No, I think those are great. I mean, I see them in our own marriage, and I think, the idea of receptive versus spontaneous, it's funny because I see that go back and forth between the two of us, quite often, like where I don't know that one of us is any more leaning towards one or the other. Well, I actually do believe, but
I think sometimes it's so much like just the dailiness of life, like what's going on and, where you're at and how you are and how your day was or whatever. But but I just think there's so much health in the talking about it. I'm realizing even as we're like having this conversation together, you realize I like going into marriage, we did like the premarital counseling and stuff, right? Where, we bring all this stuff up and we're talking through all these things. And so it felt sort of, I guess just like a more natural conversation. And then you add kids to the mix and we get in sort of the routine of that. And you realize how much this gets put on a back shelf. And we're talking about like school and, wrestling practice. We're not talking about this anymore. And just even having this conversation today is actually very refreshing to me to realize like, this is still just as accessible to talk about as it was back then when it was the focus, right? Because it's a new marriage and it all felt fresh and new. And, whatever 11 years in we are now, it's like we could still go back there and it's actually just a conversation away and realizing, and one thing you brought up, like Song of Songs, that has been to any woman and man too. I just obviously don't know what a man's brain walks through as intimately as I do as a woman's, but that has been profound for me in seasons where I came out of like that Christian church, purity culture. And we've talked about this before where it's like our old pastor used to say, the belief that sex is dirty, nasty, and wrong, and you should save it for the one that you love. but really, and that's been the negative of purity culture. And I totally grew up in that. And I don't speak ill of that in the sense of I am so grateful for what that instilled in me in so many ways and what that saved me from. And it was not, I'm not casting blame, love and bless them for what that, agenda was trying to accomplish, but there were side effects. And I've seen I'm sure, and you can speak to this, Laura, I'm sure you see a whole, segment of the church that's coming in with some of that. And maybe you could speak to that a little bit. Like what do you see as a result of that?
I think you're right that we are now seeing the downfalls of purity culture. And the problem is we believe sex is for marriage and it is for the one you love. And God gives us so much grace. I do want to say mercifully, He is so merciful and gracious. If we are struggling currently with pornography or where you don't have a squeaky clean past or anything, I just want to say right here, plugging in the gospel, that when we come to Him and ask for we ask for His forgiveness and we confess these sins and we repent and turn from it, He is faithful to forgive us. So there's absolutely hope.
That's good.
But
yeah.
With sex and with the Bible as our standard, purity culture may have skewed it a little bit toward more fear-based. And I think what's helpful to know is we can't control our emotions, but something that He does give us free will over is our thoughts. And so we can put, like you said, replacing our thoughts and putting it in good. So we can study Song of Songs, we can read scripture, we can read these Christian sex books or listen to podcasts, and we can replace those old harmful ways of thinking.
And that goes to rewiring our brains, right? Like when we have when our brain is wired for a certain, the neural pathways, our brain is malleable to rewire it. And I think, I would love to ask you, because I think that leads to desire, right? And one of the things that you talk about is desire discrepancy. Can you talk about that? And because I think it plays into this conversation. What is desire discrepancy?
Sure. Well, and desire is just how often a person would choose to engage with their spouse sexually. And that's in order for them to feel close and intimate and connected and satisfied. But the discrepancy comes in when the couple has varying levels of ideals for how often both of them want to come together sexually. And this is the part of sex that seems to cause a lot of conflict in marriage. And I think it's always helpful to get to underlying emotions and the reasons attached to your level of desire. But that's going to require a lot more conversation and homework. But like you said, that communication just promotes healthy growth in your marriage. Is
that why sex therapists tend to recommend scheduling sex?
Yes, absolutely. Because that's, I guess, how I was answering, that's a little bit more of the heart issue. But for desire discrepancy first, just a few practical pieces because scheduling sex is in there.
Okay. Yeah.
If you need practical tips for desire discrepancy and coming together, you could simply both just list out, this is how many times I want to connect per week or per month. How many times do you per week or per month? And then you just meet in the middle. Or you agree upon a certain frequency for 1 month and you try that out. The next month you change the frequency and then you evaluate. Again, you're coming together, you're communicating. Which one served our marriage best? Which one helped us grow in love and intimacy more? Which was better? And scheduling sex is a super practical way. You're right. A lot of therapists will recommend that for two main reasons. Because first of all, it actually helps it to happen. And second, because spontaneity can oftentimes lead to hurt feelings.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we experienced that.
Yeah.
It's especially when you have young kids, right? Like it's like, one person's being spontaneous and the other one has just had an absolutely exhausting day with the kids or with work. And you were building it up in your head all day and you were even maybe perceiving that he or she was too. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I just got let down.
Oh, like
Yes.
when you said that, I was like, oh, that's what happens. You just said it in words. But you think, I remember talking about scheduling, how like we were doing a class, like teaching a class at our church. And we talked about scheduling sex, and this one woman, I mean, it was like it hit every button in her. I mean, she started laughing, like she was so uncomfortable and I think angry actually. And it was like, she was sitting right in the front row and I remember being like, whoa. And she starts like having this whole rebuttal to that. And that was like it was really quite offensive to her, I realized. And I thought, oh gosh, I remember going home thinking like, oh, okay, like that, it was just very unsettling to me. And I was like, I was processing like, why did that bother me so much? And then I started to think like, okay, maybe is there something wrong with that? Like, is there like, I was very thrown off. And sure enough, I come back the next week and she said, I just want to, she like puts her hand up right before class and at the beginning. And I was like, oh gosh, here we go again. And she said, I just wanted to apologize how I reacted last week. I went home and I had this like, just, it was like inner healing really. And she said, I realized like it hit something in me. And, I'm sure there was, I don't know the whole story and I don't need to, but I realized some of these things like they get so tender and so personal, but for us, like that was something that really helped us. And it's really great to hear you say that because I feel like we've kind of gone back to the other way, but you realize that spontaneous thing, it truly does hurt people's feelings. And I think especially in a season of life, like Josh was saying, like, as when you're a young family with young kids and you fall asleep at 8:30 p.m. and and that's just like, that's also a need, right? You're in a season of almost survival where sleep is just as much a need. And that's a battle. It becomes a battle between spouses of like, what's the greater need? And do you really care about me and my need, or are you just out for your need?
Oh, and Christi, you bring up so many practical applications here too, because for young families in that stage of life, that is one of the hardest parts on a marriage for their sex life specifically is childbirth and then raising young kids. But I think of the testosterone piece specifically because we do think of that natural script where we fall into bed and that's when we connect intimately. But for women, our testosterone is replenished while we sleep or while we nap. And so when we wake up, it's actually at the highest level it will be for the day. And by the end of the night, it is down to 1/3 or 1/2 of what we originally had.
So that's what's going on.
Whoa.
Yeah. So then you can creatively problem solve. If scheduling sex is something you're willing to try, you can still be spontaneous with the time of day, the place, the position, all kinds of things. So I understand people are resistant to it at first. But if you decide, oh, what if we try the morning or shower sex or something very practical that's away from the children, then there are certain things that our body may be more receptive to that because testosterone does make sex even feel better.
Huh.
So that could be a practical application.
That 1/3 to 1/2. This makes my life make sense. This, thank you. It truly, that's like just real based on my own experience.
And so what I'm thinking is I wake up at 5:30 to work out just so that I can get ahead of the kids. So now I'm gonna have to start waking Christy up at 5 a.m. or, a little bit earlier in the morning to like get all this like before the kids, because you know how it is. It's kids and it's like the day's it's over. Like there's no more alone time together, and I think that's important to have these conversations because it is busy, and most of the people listening to our podcast have young kids, and it's frantic and it's busy. And I think, for us, I mean, we are in bed by we're going to bed at 8:30 and we're both just spent from the day. But that's because we start early too. But having this conversation, if you don't have the conversation, it just doesn't happen. And I think, so let me ask this, because just as we start to wrap up, and I want to get, and there's so many practicals. Oh my gosh, this is just been so helpful. But I'd love to ask, what is one piece of encouragement that you have for husbands specifically, and then one piece of encouragement that you would have for wives specifically in relation to everything we've been talking about?
Okay, so I think I'll start with husbands just because we're talking about the wives' testosterone and realizing that sleep is important, and that's going to help her be more engaged. And most husbands that I've met are good-willed and they love to be the hero. So I think I want to help them out, and I want to give them some insight into women. So there are a few things that across the board, here are some things that women have reported to me. Every female that I've talked to about this and books that I've read on this, they would say emotional connection is the prerequisite for sexual connection. So for a lot of them, that could be conversation, but it's important just to find out, what is that like for your wife? Because it doesn't matter what it's like for most wives. You want to find out what it's like for your wife. And so if you can find a way to emotionally connect with her, and then now that you know this piece, that fatigue is a killer of her sexual desire, could you sacrifice your schedule to make sure that she does get to sleep in one of these days per week, or get a nap, or whatever sleep cycle works for her? And then the other piece is that so many females who are moms will say, the more distance I have between my role as mom and my role as lover, that's going to serve me well in the bedroom. So if you could take on all the parental roles while she changes gears, if she's more of the receptive desire where it takes her a while to grow into that, then I think you can work that out in your schedule too. When can you take on all of the parental roles so she can have a break or a gap between mothering? And then for wives, I think there's a few things as well. My encouragement would be, sex is absolutely for you too. And I think that hasn't been taught as much in culture in general, and maybe even Christian culture, but it is for you too. God designed your clitoris with one purpose, and that's pleasure. He designed you with the capabilities for multiple orgasms. In Song of Song, he talks about your pleasure first before he gets to your husband's satisfaction. God created this for you too, and it is beautiful. And so prioritizing growing in this is absolutely worthwhile. And then because of the husbands that I've spoken with and the books I've read on this, I would say for the wife, sometimes the best way to give, because we think of being giving and selfless, sometimes the best way to give is to learn how to receive. Because a lot of husbands will say the biggest turn on for them is a turned on wife.
I agree. Is it I remember reading in Rumors of Another World by Philip Yancey a number of years ago, and you might know this, so it's been a long time since I've read it, but I think I'm close to this, but I think he mentioned that humans are the only animal species that commonly have sex face to face. That's again the rumors of another world, just the idea that sex for humans was also meant for pleasure, not just procreation. And the face-to-face connection piece is we're the only animal species that commonly does that. Is that have you heard that?
Yes, that's accurate. And you're right that procreation is great and that's a benefit, but that's not the only intention or the intention for every time we come together. That absolutely pleasure was built in the way God designed our bodies and the way he talks about it in scripture. So yes to all of that.
Laura, that's so good. I think this is such a breath of fresh air. And for those of us who, come in with like just that baggage, of from whatever side that is. How do you know, if someone's listening and they're like, this just, even like some of the words you've used, we talked about that before, like Laura's like, I don't want to shock your audience by using, like anatomical names or, orgasm and the words. And I was like, that's a great conversation you have to have. Like, cause is that triggering something in us? Like, should that be, and how do we know if there's like, maybe I need to reach out for help, and like, where do I go for that? How do I know that I'm at a place where like, maybe I could use some outside wisdom, guidance, some, outside eyes to help me see, maybe an issue that I'm struggling with, but like, how would you direct someone to know when they do need outside support?
Oh, that's such a good question, because we all are going to face issues at some point in our lives. And for married couples, if you haven't experienced any sexual issues yet, that's awesome. And I don't want to sound pessimistic, but there will be issues, whether that is childbearing or raising teenagers or aging and medical issues. And so I just want to normalize it, that we all need help in this area. And there's so much brokenness. So a few places, I think anybody would be ready for this, because I think it's so beneficial for them. So if there's unresolved past trauma, or if there's abuse in the past, or if there's conflict in the marriage, or if this is just not a satisfying part of your marriage, I think that God does not want to have you miss out on any good thing he intended. So I think a very great place to start is with a Christian therapist. And if there's a Christian sex therapist in your area, I think there's only around 200 of them in the United States. So that would be a great place. There's also more accessible to everyone would be some of these books that we can link to, where you're starting to learn whether it's how to become more easily orgasmic or how to talk through these things with your spouse. That's a great place. And then for someone who has never experienced orgasm, I definitely would say, please reach out for help. It is possible, and there are so many different reasons that could be preventing this. And so a few places to begin would be a pelvic floor specialist. They can help if you're having pain with intercourse or if you've never orgasmed before. And then some similar things that you might reach out to a sexual medicine expert or doctor. That would be another place to turn for help as well, if it's more of the physical related issues. But there is help available.
That's so good. I actually, my pelvic floor physio, I love her so much. She goes to church with us actually, but she's helped me so much before babies and after babies. And I know she has a whole list of clients that come for like more of the sexual disordered. And that wasn't my main reason for coming, because I was coming off with babies, but it was so cool to learn from her how she helps people. I was like, I honestly didn't even know that was possible. Like, I didn't know people specialized in that. So it's so cool. I thank you for mentioning that, because it's, that whole I think it's like such a private conversation that we're used to not having. And therefore it's so shrouded. It's like, there's no help for me, right? It's like, there's no one to talk to and there's nowhere to go. And that's actually just not true. There really are incredible people, even just talking to you, Laura, like, I think that helps all of us put our minds at ease that like, if we were to enter into conversations like that, maybe it's just not as terrible as we would build it up in our heads. There really are incredible, wise people out there who are genuinely gifted at helping.
Yeah. And I think to just bounce off of what Christi just said, I think if there's one thing that I would leave you all with that you're listening today, we're going to get those books from Laura. We're going to put them in the show notes for you so that you have some of those books that you can read with your spouse and some of these resources. I also want to make sure to point you to the Salvi Sauce podcast. We'll put that in the show notes, and just follow Laura's work. I also, if there's anything that I think my practical takeaway from this and the thing that I would just encourage you in is take permission to have the conversation. Like, I hope that this conversation, this podcast episode, gives you permission to simply have the conversation with your spouse and to start talking about things that maybe have felt awkward or uncomfortable. But let this be your permission to make it comfortable and to make it normal. And so, Laura, with that, I'm going to leave you with the final, anything that you have on your heart that you didn't get to say, or the one practical takeaway you want to leave them with. I'm going to leave you with that last word.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think my prayer for this conversation was, first of all, for people to experience the fragrance of Jesus Christ and be pointed to the knowledge of him, but also practically for these marriages to come together and be transformed. So if anyone wants to follow up and learn more about biblically based sexual intimacy in a safe place, I would direct them just to thesavvysauce.com. I think so far we have 40 to 50 episodes that are specifically addressing sexual intimacy in marriage, along with a whole heap of book recommendations. But that's not the only topic that we talk about. That's maybe once a month that we cover that. So we have plenty more episodes coming. And then on that same website, if you want to join our email list.
Literally, as we're on this, I just subscribed to your podcast. I'm not actually a podcast listener, funny enough, as you would maybe think, because we do a podcast. I don't really listen to many. There's just not a lot of free time in the day. But you realize when you feel that like spark of like life and like curiosity, and it's like, yeah, I need that infusion in my life because I'm not getting that anywhere else. So thank you, Laura, for what you do and how I feel like you're just bringing life to the body of Christ, because there has been so much stolen, especially in the area. I mean, we talk about marriage and family and relationships all the time, but this is one corner, and it's a really important one in marriage, but it's stolen so much joy and so much life. And just like you said, it's like one of the gifts that God wants to give us, and he wants it like to fullness. Like he wants to give us the fullness of it. And so often we settle for the lesser version. So thank you for pushing all of us into the fullness of what God has for us.
Oh, thank you for that encouragement, and for your encouragement always to be famous at home. I hope that this aids people to start that transformation from the inside out, because I do think it will bless our children and families as well.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Well, those of you listening, thank you so much for joining. Again, we'll have Laura's website, everything in the show notes today. Laura, once again, just send our love to Mark and to your family as well. We love you guys, and thank you for this is to be continued, and so we're excited for that. I think there's more down the road here, and so those of you listening, I think we'll have Laura back on, because there's just this is so much good stuff, and there's just so much more to talk about. So until next week, keep in mind that the greatest red carpet you will walk is through your front door.
Keep being famous at home. We love you.
Thank you for listening to the Famous at Home podcast. If anything we said today hit home with you or resonated in such a way you want to share it with others, go find us on Instagram at Famous at Home and comment, share, tell others about today's episode.
We'd also love if you would leave us a review. Reviews mean so much to us, and they also help other people find out about the podcast. So if you could leave us a review, we would appreciate it.
You can also visit famousathome.com/podcast to submit a question or topic for a future episode.
And for coaching or speaking inquiries for your family or your organization, visit famousathome.com. We would love to serve you.
Because the greatest red carpet you'll ever walk is through your front door.